Good morning, everyone. I'm Christine Chin, Dean of the School of International Service here at American University. It is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to this discussion. I'm particularly pleased to welcome Ambassador Lianys Torres Rivera, Cuba's ambassador to the United States. Ambassador Torres Rivera is the first woman to lead Cuba's diplomatic mission in Washington, D.C., a position she assumed in January 2021. Her Excellency's diplomatic career extends back nearly 30 years and includes serving as Cuba's ambassador to Vietnam, other postings in Malaysia and Denmark, and as a member of the Cuban delegation involved in reestablishing diplomatic relations between US and Cuba in 2015. Ambassador Torres Rivera, we look forward to hearing your perspective on a number of issues, including the global response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today, and welcome virtually to the School of International Service. Our discussion today will be moderated by SIS Professor Emeritus Philip Brenner, an expert on US-Cuba relations. Since 1985, Dr. Brenner has served on the advisory board of the National Security Archive and has been involved in the archive's efforts to declassify and disseminate documents about US foreign policy, including those related to the Cuban Missile Crisis. He also is an advisory board member of the Center for Democracy in the Americas. Phil is the co-author of Cuba Libre, a 500-year quest for independence. Philip, I can think of no one better to lead this conversation, and I will now pass the Zoom mic over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dean Chin. I appreciate those warm remarks, and welcome to the ambassador. It's a great privilege to moderate this discussion. As the audience probably understands, your appointment as ambassador to the United States is really quite important, indicates the importance to Cuba, because your last posting was also a country of great importance to Cuba. And so there is a large audience that's with us today in order to hear your remarks. Unfortunately, Cuba has been not in the news very much, and when it gets into the news, it's usually negative. There are so many other things going on, and the press has not paid much attention to what's happening in Cuba. So this is a great opportunity for us to learn about what's happening in Cuba, how Cuba is responding to the various challenges that the country faces, and internationally, what's going on. Before we begin, I'd like to thank Dairo Moreno from Civitas Global Educational Services for helping to make this event possible. The organization has been a strong advocate for education, engagement, and partnership building. The discussion will last about an hour. The last 15 or 20 minutes devoted to questions and answers. If you would like to ask a question, please submit it through the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And closed captioning will be available for this recording, and it will be recorded so that you can watch it later or send the link to other people on the SIS YouTube channel. So let us begin, Ambassador, if you don't mind. Let me start by asking you about US-Cuban relations. The Biden administration has continued the Trump administration's policy of hostility towards Cuba, despite President Biden's pledge during the campaign to roll back inhumane sanctions. Where do you see the future of US-Cuban relations in the next 3 years?
Well, first of all, good morning to everyone. Thank you, Dean Chin, for your introduction, and also to our friend Philip Brenner, whom we have a long relation on Cuba. Well, you were talking about the future of the relation between the US and Cuba. Well, First, we have to talk about the relations that we used to have with the previous, the administration of Obama, the Obama administration. The policy towards Cuba of former President Obama showed that a less contentious bilateral relation between Cuba and the US was possible. Those years, 2015 and 2016, showed that it is possible to have a different relationship between our countries, despite the political differences that we have, that both governments have. The Trump administration came and reversed all Obama's policy, imposing more than 240 measures on trade, travel, and financial sector, which are still in place, by the way, and returning Cuba to the list of state sponsors of terrorism. Also interrupted bilateral political exchanges, although during the first 1.5 years, we used to have even migration talks with the Trump administration. Official dialogue, as I said, and cooperation between our two countries based on mutual interest and benefits, with benefit and positive results that were recognized at that time by both parties. As a result of that, US citizens and business sector alike are limited in developing a relationship that has been proven to be beneficial to both countries. It was also, we have to say, limited academic and scientific exchange, depriving the American people of the benefits of international recognized biotech and pharmaceutical product developed in Cuba. The Trump administration also reduced dramatically the staff at the US Embassy in Havana, effectively shutting down consular services. He justified that move by citing unexplained health incidents. As a result, Cuba, who wished to apply for a visa since then, has to travel to, a visa to travel to the US has to go to a third country for this application. As we all know, hundreds of Americans in dozens of countries reported symptoms, but only Cubans have been punished for the unexplained health incidents. Many Cubans are waiting for the Cuban family reunification program, for example. And since the early days of the Biden administration, it has publicly stated that a Cuba policy review process was underway. We don't know the true pace and scope of this process. In terms of the blockade, the current policy towards Cuba, it is the same as the previous administration because the Cuban people are enduring the same sanctions. It is a terrible mistake to continue to implement such cruel sanctions, even during a pandemic. Cuba has always been willing to move forward with the US, even with the Trump administration. The only thing that we ask is respect for our sovereignty, our self-determination, and no interference in our internal affairs. During the Obama administration, we signed 22 MOUs on areas like agriculture, telecommunications, law enforcement, even program for teaching English, public health, environment, among others. All these documents are of the interest of the Cuban people and the US people. And we could be cooperating for the well-being of our two people. We are neighbors, so it's obvious that we have a lot of common ground for cooperation. So to answer to your question, Bill, of where I see the bilateral relation in the next 3 years or in the future, the near future, I hope that the US government takes into account the real interest of both the Cuban people and the US people, and start cooperating in areas like the ones that I mentioned before that could be beneficial for our countries to do. So.
Thank you very much. So you mentioned the pandemic. Let me turn to what happened to Cuba in 2021. Some people have called it a perfect storm of calamities. There was a major loss of income to Cuba because the island shut down to all tourism to protect Cuban people from COVID-19. There were shortages of food and medicine, blackouts due to fuel shortages, and obstacles involved due to the sanctions that the United States imposed. So can you help us understand how the government has responded to these various problems and where do things stand now?
Well, certainly, as you were saying, the situation it is like a storm, but it's better now. The previous administration, the previous US administration applied a policy of tightening the economic blockade against Cuba, with the adoption of, as I said, more than 140 coercive measures, of which more than 50 were implemented in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, which prevented or complicated for Cuba the acquisition of supplies, all the necessary supplies to face the pandemic, with the clear intention of aggravating the Cuban economic and social scenario. Such measures damaged bilateral relations, hindered the economic development of our country, and their effect inevitably affect the daily life of the Cuban people. All these actions have followed, as many times we Cubans say, the script of the then Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, Lester Marbury, a memorandum dated on April 6, 1960, where he proposed a policy aimed at denying funds and supplies to Cuba, to decrease monetary and real wages, to bring about hunger, desperation, and the overthrow of the Cuban government. As you said, Bill, when President Biden was vice president, spoke in support of Obama's efforts to change some restrictions on Cuba. And he promised to roll back the previous president's strategy during his presidential campaign, saying that he would try to reverse the failed Trump policies that inflicted harm on Cubans and their families. It is difficult to suppose that to think that the common US citizen agrees or is in line with punishing the entire population of a neighboring country for more than 60 years with the purpose of causing economic stability, hardship, and lack of supply, and the suffering of the entire population. The US people is not like that. There is a huge misinformation campaign about the situation in Cuba and how the sanctions work. US citizens would sympathize with Cuba's plight if they understood the extent to which the blockade hurts the country and its people. Cuba is not a state sponsor of terrorism, nor does it represent a threat to the US. It is known to the that is known to the President of the US, to the Secretary of State, and all officials that are in charge of law enforcement in the US, and that has had a relation with the Cuban counterparts in the past. But this Trump's last minute move to re-include Cuba in the terrorist list, in addition to constituting an slander, has additional practical implication for Cuba, which has been a victim of terrorism itself. And as you know, terrorism and terrorist action that has been financed, organized, and perpetrated from the US and has caused more than 3,500 dead in Cuba and more than 2,000 people incapacitated. Our country has a consistent and well documented position of intolerance against terrorism in any of its manifestations. We have conveyed to the US government our willingness to maintain bilateral cooperation to confront terrorism for the benefit of our two people. But even removing Cuba from the unfair terrorist list, once again, could leave in place the expansive economic boycott that applies not only to US companies, but also to foreign companies, to foreign entities looking to trade with Cuba. And we all remember the Helms-Burton Act. And in addition to this context, to this political context, the US government intensified a group of restrictive measures of the blockade even during the pandemic, particularly the sanctions of financial entities to prevent them for receiving any transaction with Cuba, the punishment of all carriers to a maritime insurance company to stop the fuel supply to Cuba, aimed at suffocating our economy. And all these sanctions, plus the effect of the pandemic, have implied that the country's main sources of foreign exchange were immediately cut off. We are talking about tourism, trips to our country, remittances, etc. And this situation, as you were saying, caused food, medicine, raw materials, and supply scarcities, and that was a real obstacle to develop our economy and production process, which in turn are affecting our exports and supply for the people. But despite the Cuban economy is in a very tense situation, we could say that we are experiencing an exceptional situation with all the complexity that the intensified blockade incorporate. It has been possible to stop the economic decline for 3 consecutive quarters, and the country is beginning a recovery. Although although with the level of supply that is still much lower and insufficient than the demand the Cuban people have. We lost, and it's in the news, 13% of our GDP in a short period of time, and we did not give up social spending despite of this decreasing. We have maintained a level of social spending without having the income for that. And in the midst of this economic restriction, more than 200,000 jobs has been created in Cuba. Progress has been made in the expansion and improvement of the non-state sector, with the incorporation of new economic actors that are there are already more than 2,000 approved, or almost 2,000 approved micro, small and medium companies and cooperative. Work has been done to increase the autonomy of the state-owned companies, which are the main actors of the Cuban economy. But we have to say also that we have not increased the electricity fare, even during this economic situation, or the price of fuel in the country, neither the rates of communications. In fact, we have lowered them. We have not increased the prices of the regulated family basket. We have protected as well interrupted workers. And we continue to work on increasing supply, and a set of measures have been taken that have to do with national production, and even to allow without commercial character and without payment of tariff, the importation of food and medicine and other products. We have to say that, for example, in the first month of 2022, 86,000 visitors have arrived in our country, which means 64,000 more than in the same period of 2021. 30,000 more tons of agricultural products are also quantified, which shows that agricultural production is growing. Of course, is not enough. And we know that, and we are working for that. But, and also, as is in the news, the pandemic is lowering in Cuba. We have, for example, in the past few days, the average of positive cases is under 500 in the whole country, which means that we are controlling well the pandemic. We have almost 95%, 93% exactly of those who can be vaccinated are fully vaccinated. And more than 67% of those have a booster, so 4 shots. And all of this has been done with our own efforts, with the strong will by our government to produce our own vaccines, and of course the great efforts of our scientific community and biotech community and health community in Cuba, which made everything possible to have our people protected from the pandemic. And this is the current situation and the answer to your second question.
I could just ask you to elaborate a little bit about the vaccine. Can you tell us what Cuba's efforts are to export the vaccine to third world countries?
Well, there are some countries that has been interested in having our vaccines, which has been, by the way, certified by our regulatory authority in Cuba. I mean, the Cuban one. After all the clinical trials and the examination of the files about the vaccines. And we are now in the process of submitting the information to the WHO. In fact, Abdallah has already done that, and Soberana is preparing itself for that. Cuba is ready to and has been ready to help with our possibilities to help other countries, not only with that, but also with medical brigades to help on the spot in every country that needs it to fight the pandemic. So this is the situation now, and we are optimistic that, taking into account the results that our vaccine has had in Cuba, that can be in the future used in other countries.
Thank you. If you can, you suggested that there is access to the internet that is a very low price. In fact, Cuba had greatly expanded access to the internet in recent years, but it also passed some new laws that hold the potential to limit free expression on the internet. Can you help us understand these seemingly contradictory actions?
Well, the real story here, Phil, is the use, or could be the use of the internet in destabilizing attempts aimed at subverting the constitutional order in Cuba and fomenting a soft coup of a fourth generation war on the island. It is something that has also been covered by other news outlets like Reuters and Newsweek, and let it be recognized with the expert of the matter. As was denounced by our foreign minister, Bruno Rodriguez, in a presentation to the diplomatic corps in Havana a month ago, platforms such as Twitter and Facebook transgressed their own policy by altering geolocation mechanism to encourage toxic operations against Cuba inside the destabilization actions. Cuba, as a sovereign and independent country, rejects any kind of interference in its cyberspace and internal affairs. And we have to say that the widespread use of computers in the country, along with COVID-19 restrictions, which kept people at home, have generated new patterns of the use of telecommunication services. Cuba's government have been trying to widen, as you said, such access for years. We have a comprehensive plan for the informatization of the country, but we have a great obstacles to advance in this objective. I don't know if our audience today know, because sometimes I speak with people here who are not aware that because of the blockade, we cannot buy any equipment in any country that has more than 10% of US components. If the blockade, so we are trying to update and to widen internet access in Cuba, and the US government is always saying they favors that, but we cannot buy the equipment to do it. So everything that has been done by our government with our own efforts, and despite of all the blockade. And there's always a question that comes to my mind. If the blockade is an excuse, as several critics of the Cuban Revolution affirm, why don't you leave the excuse and give us time to see if it is our own fault or the blockade's fault? But talking about telecommunication, despite the effects of the blockade imposed by the US to the telecommunication sector, by the way, during 2020 and 2021, more than 1,500 radio bases were installed in Cuba. Mobile lines increased by almost 650,000. The Now Togar internet access service from homes increased by more than 87,000 new customers. International links connectivity was expanded by more than 7 times compared to 2017 levels. I read something the other day that we are ranking on the 17th place in Latin America in terms of connectivity, of internet connectivity. We could say also that the youth and computer clubs, electronic clubs that exist in Cuba increased their telecommunication infrastructure, reaching 400 installation with optical fiber. And like that, we have more examples. But we have to say that it's not only Cuba, but other countries that have also regulations for the use of internet and social network. Cuba is not the only one. We could mention countries in the region like Brazil, like Argentina, but also countries in Europe. And no country, including the US, allows agents financed by foreign actors, by foreign governments, to use the network, to use internet to advance a foreign political agenda. Free expression doesn't mean you speak your mind openly in that public space. The hate speech, the call for violence and acts of aggression cannot be and won't be tolerated in Cuba. That's my answer to your question.
Thank you. That clarifies. We're going to turn it open to questions and answers soon, but I notice in the question and answer box, there are several questions about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine and the questions about Cuba's position about the conflict in Ukraine. Could you help us understand why Cuba voted to abstain and what is Cuba's position about the fighting?
Well, Cuban position on this conflict, this war that is taking place in Ukraine, was stated in February in two statements, but the last one from February 26. But also there was a speech that was given by our Ambassador Pedro Luis Pedroso at the United Nations. I think it was yesterday.
Yes.
Yes, and the position, the Cuban position on this issue is clear. We reject, and the position is strong and firm, and is based on our respect to the international law and to our commitment to the UN chapter. We always have always defend peace and unambiguously oppose the use of force or even the threat of use of force against any country. That is why Cuba promoted and support the proclamation of Latin American as a zone of peace that was signed in Havana in 2014. And Cuba is also committed to the international humanitarian law and calls for all parties to protect the civilian population, their possession and infrastructure. And we deeply regret the loss of life in Ukraine, in innocent civilian lives in Ukraine. And as you know, Peter, Cuban people, we have had and continue to have a very close relation with the Ukrainian people. Many of you and us remember all that we did for years back with the children and some all others that were that had health issues after Chernobyl, and they were treated in Cuba. So our sentiments to the Ukrainian people are legitimate, and as I said, that is our position. But of course, it is impossible for us to make an honest examination of the current situation in Ukraine without carefully assessing the factors, the historic factors, even those that have some years that had led to this unfortunate situation and conflict that we have now with the use of force and not observant of the legal and international legal principles and international norms. But as I said, Cuba strongly endorsed and supports those principles of international law. And I repeat that Cuba opposes the use or even the threat of use of force in any circumstances.
Thank you. If you could come back to the economy. you talk about changes in the economy, 2,000 licenses for small and medium enterprises. The Constitution of 2019 talks about Cuba being a mixed economy with protections for private property. Can you help us understand what that means in terms of the next 5 to 10 years? Where do you see Cuba's economy in the next what will Cuba look like?
Well, you mentioned the Constitution. Well, the Constitution was passed by 86, more than 86% of positive votes. And I remember that the referendum, and many people don't know that, with ballot votes were guarded by girls and boys and public scrutiny review as evidence of the true democracy. But we have to say, and it should be noted, that this process was preceded by an extensive popular debate that did not take in ideal circumstances, but after almost 6 decades of a blockade aimed at making the Cuban people surrendered by hardship. And Cuba is involved now in the process of implementing the socioeconomic guidelines and the conceptualization of the Cuban economic and social model of socialist development that was approved, as you remember, in the 8th Congress of the Communist Party. And we have an economic and social development plan that was passed that is set until the year 2030. In the midst of this pandemic, progress has continued in the socio-economic strategy, with 210 measures implemented of the 314 approved. But at the same time, the strengthening of the state-owned companies, the improvement of economic actor was approved, as I mentioned before. And because of that we are seeing an expansion of self-employment in Cuba, non-agricultural cooperative, and the micro, small, and medium enterprises. We must highlight that the results we are making in the battle, as I said, against COVID-19 with our own vaccines are the result of the development of the biotech industry and health that has been achieved in Cuba after more than 60 years. We are a nation of peace, Phil, as you know, a nation of solidarity, of friendship. We have the first Latin American vaccines, Abdala, Soberana, O2, and Soberana Plus. And I forgot to mention that we have immunized children from 2 years old. I think we are one of, if not the only one of the few that has done that. And Cuba saved lives. And not only feels the responsibility and commitment of international society, but we have an enthusiasm focused on being able to share our knowledge with other countries. For example, in January 2015, Cuba had trained around 13,000 people to deal with Ebola in 28 African countries, in addition to 68,000 in Latin America and 68 in the Caribbean. Since the beginning of the pandemic, some 40 countries and territory of 5 continents have received Cuban medical brigade to combat the disease. We are constantly renewing ourselves, constantly with the desire to do what is for the best of our people based on the participation of the people. We are a society open to dialogue, to the improvement of our society. We have an enormous will to continue expanding our democracy, the space for debate. This is something that has been said by our president, Miguel Díaz-Canel. And we have the will also to expand the participation of our citizens based on the Constitution. But we are a society that at the same time rejects external pressure and foreign interference. Our country, with a modest economy, a block economy, and few natural resources, has, we could say, a remarkable social development. And we work every day to find solution, work hard to find solution to the important social problems and the most pressing needs of the vast majority of our population. But we have to be clear. The main obstacle to the economic and social development of the country is the United States blockade, which last February 3rd became 60 years old. So this is something that must be changed because it hurts Cuban people, but also Cuban families, not only in Cuba, and it is again international law.
So just to be clear, what you call the blockade, appropriately, in the United States, we call it the embargo. Our audience is aware of what we're talking about. Last July, there were unprecedented demonstrations in Cuba. There were several questions that have been asked about these demonstrations. Last week, the Ministry of Justice said that there were 790 people who were arrested and are undergoing trial as a result of those demonstrations. Can you speak to what the significance of those demonstrations were and the status of these people who were on trial?
Well, Phil, I was in Havana in July 11, and what I saw there is not what the news here and around the world was saying. There was, as I said before, a huge misinformation campaign against Cuba, around Cuba at that time. The protests, the social unrest at that time were anything but pacific. They were, those people that are being processed now are people who were involved in vandalism, assault on authorities, of officials, policemen, for example, and that assaulted and damaged public and private property. For example, hospital, pediatric hospital, police station, and other public properties, and serious disturbances of the public order. We have to say that you were mentioning 790 persons. You say that?
Yes.
Yeah. Of those, 110 cases has been submitted to the court with 710 defendants. We have to say that all this process has been conducted, and if you watch the Cuban television, which of course here in the US you cannot do, but the news at night every day in Cuba, you can find information there about those process, and you can hear even the lawyers that the defendant designated, or the state designated in case they don't have one, and all of them were expressing that the process were carried out with all the guarantees that are in our law, and everything has been done on taking into account the due, as I said, the due process, and according to the law. They were also in in the news some people saying that they were minors involved in the trials. Minors under 16 years old in Cuba are not subject to criminal law. During the investigations, participation was verified of 27 underage individuals, in whose cases established legal measures were taken. 10 were assigned to comprehensive behavior remediation schools, not prison like here in the US and in many countries, given their involvement with others in the commission of those acts that I mentioned before. While 17 of them are receiving special and individual attention in the national education system and schools they attend now. So, as I said, the social unrest, the protests were nothing but pacific. Violence, there was violence there, and those that are being processed now are people that has participated in those acts of vandalism, assault on authorities, and that has damaged public and private property, as I mentioned before.
And the significance of the demonstrations, can you speak to how the Cuban government understands their importance?
Well, the protest took place in a moment that was very difficult for Cuba in terms of the pandemic. Well, let's put in context. It was summer in Cuba, that you know the temperatures are very high. We were going through the worst pandemic peak in Cuba at that time. People were tired after more than 1.5 years with lockdown. Schools were closed, and we have, as I said, scarcity of food, scarcity, and you were saying as well, of medicine. And then you have all this situation, and then you have a campaign from the US and from other countries, but especially for the US, funded with regime change program that were promoting violence in Cuba. And what we have to say on this is that our government did what has been doing for many years, and what is doing now is that as I said before, to take care of our people, to for example, some people were saying to me the other day, but what about this, what is being done in some underserved neighborhoods? Well, that is stated, and that is something that was talked during the party congress in Cuba. So it's not new. It's not new. So what our government is doing, and the significance for our country and for our government, is the situation that we have now. And it was what our government was doing at that time. Our government at that time was working hard to have vaccines, even with the obstacle of the blockade. So at that time, we were working to have vaccines, to have our population vaccinated, to serve all the neighborhoods and of the country that has this situation. And that is what the government have been doing. So to have the population vaccinated, to tackle the pandemic, and to tackle all the economic situation that we have. So what the government is doing is to work for the country as we have, the government has been doing before. I was mentioning the socio-economic strategy that was passed before July 11. So on July 11, our government was focused in resolve the situation, the hardship and the economic situation of the country. And that is when it has been doing before, and that is what it is doing now and will be doing in the near future. But as I said before, the main obstacle for all this is the economic blockade, the sanctions.
So speaking of that, let me read a question from the people in the audience. The question is, Ambassador, many thanks for your time. As the son of a Cuban immigrant from Camagüey, I appreciate your remarks. Can you tell us how you'll be able to overcome the obstacles facing the difficult relations between Cuba and the United States? What can Cuba do to relax the tension between Cuba and the United States?
Well, Phil, Cuba has expressed to the US are willing to talk about any issue that is damaging now the bilateral relation, but it's not, I mean, when you have a relation, it takes two to tango. So we are open to dialogue. The only thing that we ask for, as I said before, is to, I mean, respect for our sovereignty, to no interference in internal affairs. It's only that, and the US government knows that. So we could advance on this basis, we could advance, but it is up to the US government how to do it. Anyway, as I mentioned before, Cuban, we have our own plan, and we will continue with or without the US. It's better if we do it with the US because we are neighbors and our people are neighbors, and we have families here and there are families in Cuba that has many things in common, even relative. So we are ready to advance, but not without giving up those principles that I mentioned before. But we will advance. We will advance for sure, with our own efforts and those of the efforts of those who believe in Cuba and support Cuba.
Let me ask you a final question. This year, it's expected that there will be a new family code in Cuba, replacing the 1976 family code. Can you tell us what that new code would entail, how it will affect the rights of women, the LGBTQ community?
Well, the code and all the debate that is being carried out in Cuba is a show of true democracy. And well, it is a very advanced code, as you said, that don't take out rights for people, for some people, but in the opposite, it gives rights to the LGBT community, to more rights to women, to the also to grandparents, for example, that give the opportunity, more opportunity to have rights to many people in Cuba. It is, we call it the code of love, we could say, the code of love. It is a more inclusive framework, legal framework for the Cuban society. And the one that we have now that is in force is not, it doesn't reflect the real Cuban society, the current Cuban society. So we we need a new Cuban code, families code. It's not family code. It's the code of families, because we have what we want is to have there all the Cuban families included, not only the one of a woman and a man, but also the single mother family, the single parent family, the LGTB families. So it is a more inclusive code. It is, we could say, emancipated code. So we hope that it will be welcome, and I'm sure it will be welcomed by the majority of the Cuban population. And after we have that, it will be one of the most advanced families code in the world. And as I said, it reflects the current Cuban. So I fully support it, by the way.
I would think so. Well, thank you very much, Ambassador, for taking an hour with us. And I appreciate also the help that we've got again from Dairo Moreno and from Amy and Kate in the SIS events office in the School of International Service. The next event that will be featured is on March 14th and 15th, a series of webinars on called Peace on the River, the Nile, the Jordan, and the Middle East in an era of climate change. We look forward to having you join us for that. Thank you again, Ambassador. We look forward to seeing you in the future.
Bye. Thank you.